Most people believe marriage is a coin toss, 50-50. Either you make it or you don't. But what if I told you that number is dead wrong? Because when you look at the real data, it's far worse than anyone wants to admit. If you include everyone who never marries, who can't get married, can't get anyone to marry them, or has checked out of that market, or just doesn't believe in marriage, so you include those people, plus couples who stay together but who are sexually disconnected and miserable, the real marriage failure rate isn't 50%. It's over 86%. That means only about 14 in the best case scenario. Okay, only about 14 of every 100 adults are in a relationship that's both stable and sexually fulfilling. Think about that for a second. And it is probably worse than that. Okay, because, and I'm going to go over all the numbers and explain things. It's probably worse because if we use the female orgasm and orgasm quality as a measure of sexual satisfaction in relationships, instead of relying on just opinion polls, right, and self reporting, then sexual dissatisfaction jumps up to 82%. So, at an 82% sexual dissatisfaction rate, that means only about 4% of marriages and long-term relationships for that matter can be considered successful. 4%. And I'll break down all of these numbers for you. But think about that. Out of 100 people you know, maybe 4 of them are actually happy, connected, and still attracted to the person that they're in a relationship with. Crazy. All right. Now, that's a lot of doom and gloom, and I'm not trying to be doom and gloom or anti-relationship. I've said this before. I'm a relationship coach. At least it's part of what I do. Okay, I'm a mindset coach, okay, and a human behavior expert, and I help people do better in relationships as part of that. And it's a big part of what I do. It's a lot of what my channel is dedicated to, right? So I'm not anti-relationship and then here coaching you guys on how to be successful in relationships. But you have to face the reality of where we're at. You have to know the risks and you have to know the problems. All right. Because the thing is, your personal probability isn't necessarily as bad as the numbers that are out there. Okay. Because you have choices you can make and you have some control over your relationship success or failure. And we will talk about that too. Okay. So you can change those numbers. I could do the same live stream and break down numbers to convince people to never start a business, for example, because over 90% of businesses fail, right? So you can do this sort of exercise for a lot of things, but that doesn't mean people aren't successful in business, okay? You only have really one life and one chance at life. So you need to take the risk and do what you feel is right and what you want. So if you're somebody watching this who believes in marriage and you think that it's your God-given imperative to be married, then go get married. But you have to know the risks in order to be able to mitigate those risks so you can be successful. I wouldn't suggest that somebody starts a business when starting a business and has such a high failure rate in general without doing any research or without learning any skills on how to be successful in that business. That would be insane, right? You would ensure that you're part of the 96% or whatever the number actually is for failing in a business. You could be sure you're going to fail if you do no research and if you learn no skills on how to be successful in your business. All right. Like we know that with stuff like that. But for some reason, because I'll tell you why, it's because relationships get down into our instinctual, reactive mammalian brains. We ego protect and lie to ourselves about relationship stuff and sexual stuff. So everybody is out there busy lying to themselves and coping and capping and not facing reality. And unfortunately, then what ends up happening is you end up falling to your instinct and whatever the social environment is pointing those instincts towards. And right now, the social environment we're in does not point your natural instincts towards having a successful marriage or having a successful long term relationship. This means you have to use your big brain, okay? And you have to change your behaviors, your beliefs, your approaches, and you have to learn skills so that if you want success, whether you get married by the state or not, it doesn't matter. Whether you want success in a long term relationship, you have to point your instincts in a direction that's different than where society is going to take you, because society leads you to multiple divorces and illegitimate children. Okay, that's what the numbers show. And it leads you to relationship dissatisfaction and unhappiness, which, in my opinion, is a failed relationship. Somebody stuck in a relationship that they hate is not a successful relationship. All right. So you have people out there, of course, because what's popular is the binary thinking, right? You got the defenders of marriage and marriage truth, and then no, marriage is terrible, don't do it, right? And you have these two people fighting against each other. But the problem with the defenders, okay, of marriage is that they're not willing to face a lot of times the facts that we have these serious statistical problems and we have these problems that exist that get in the way of having a healthy marriage. You can't defend marriage or defend relationships and have no understanding of why they are failing, no realistic picture of what the failure rates are, and no way of mitigating for those problems. All right. So I'm not doing this just to say never get married, relationships are cooked, everybody go buy a sex doll or something, right? That's not the point of my stream. That's not the point of my channel. It's not the point of what I do. But I'm critical of marriage in as a whole in society because we're failing as a society when it comes to marriage. So we have to be critical of that. We have to recognize the problems, not magnify the problems or minimize the problems to support or bolster our argument, but recognize what the problems really are, look at the real data, and then we can make changes in our lives to get what we want. Whether, and most people want really, and a long-term relationship, whether it's marriage or just being in a relationship that lasts, until old age, right? Where you're with somebody for a while and it's successful. Most people want that. That is the highest ROI for successful people. Okay. Most successful people out there aren't, like your Andrew Tates or something, right? Which I'm not criticizing Andrew Tate, but most successful people aren't him. Okay. Who have a bunch of girls all the time, right? Or whatever. Most people that are successful, okay, and I'm not talking about failures, but really successful people with a lot more money than Andrew Tate, in fact, okay, usually have long-term relationships that they do. Because whether they're doing it right or doing it wrong is a whole nother story. And a lot of them aren't doing it right. We know that. Okay. But they're leaning towards long-term relationships because it's the highest ROI for successful people. Instead of spinning a bunch of girls and dealing with a bunch of girl drama, having a stable relationship with somebody that gives you the best success outcomes as a man for solving your reproductive problem, right? Being able to have a sexual relationship, being able to have a companionship, all that stuff. And to be able to not worry about that and the security of that to the degree of somebody who's in an unstable relationship. You know what I mean? So just having a stable one of those things tends to be what people drive towards, what people want. So wouldn't it be nice if we had the real information about what those numbers are and the statistics? And wouldn't it be nice if you understood those things and you knew what you could do about it so you could have those things that you want, right? Like it's interesting that we don't have that. And I'll get into why we don't have that. Okay. And I'm going to break down these numbers too. So you're not just going to have to take my word for it. You're going to see a very systematic breakdown because Most of the data on this stuff is pretty freaking terrible. All right. So that said, get into a little bit of an announcement. So I have something I've been working on. I'm excited. Okay. I announced it last week. I'm still in the announcement phases. I haven't made any commercials for it. I haven't really put a big marketing push on it yet. Okay. Because I'm busy doing this kind of stuff for you guys. All right. But I have a course I've developed. It's called the Psychopaths Playbook. Ooh, right. Okay. It's the non-psychopath's guide to winning and dating in life. All right. This is a brand new course where I break down how to harness traits, okay? Traits that make a lot of psychopaths successful. Things like fearless confidence, ruthless focus, emotional control, but without being a psychopath, right? And you can harness these traits so you can win in dating, win in your relationships, master your inner game, level up in life. Okay. I'm opening up this as an exclusive thing. All right. You just got to get into my community and school. There's a link in the description. If you're in my community, that's where I'm going to put the announcements and the enrollment for the wait list when I get to that. Okay. And that's when there's going to be deals for those who can get in. And I'm going to have a numbers cap for how many can get into the course so they can put the most amount of attention into those who've enrolled, because it's going to be both course material as well as live. Okay. And so I'm going to limit the seating for that. So if you want access, okay, this is going to be a good opportunity for you. It's not going to be a break the bank situation either. Okay. It's going to be decently, reasonably priced course. If you want access to it, you got to get into my community. Okay. So you can get the invite and secure your spot when I finally launch it officially. Okay. So that's that. And the community links in the description. So that's it for announcements. Now let's talk about, and I will say too, love the participation, man. You guys are great. I'm putting a lot of effort into trying to beat the algorithms on YouTube. I say beat them, but have them work for me rather than against me. It's just, I'm doing my best with that. Your guys' help is appreciated. I think that I put out life-saving information for a lot of guys and a lot of couples, people who want to do things good in relationships. I think my information is pretty life-saving, but I'm not on extreme sides of a thing. I'm not sensationalizing things. I don't do things to try to stimulate people's anxiety parts of the brain too badly and just say crazy things on the internet or whatever. So I don't get like the algorithmic help. You know what I mean? There's demographic reasons why I don't get the algorithmic help, and there's just the nature of what I do, because people are more attracted to sensational, crazy stuff that doesn't help them versus information that would actually help them. It's just the way it is. And unfortunately, anything that's sort of contrarian to maybe what the social narrative is, which I tend to be, for example, I don't think modern feminism has been good. So that's a contrary position to where maybe YouTube might land in terms of their opinions. And so I get suppressed algorithmically. And that means that if we want to get more life-saving information out to guys to change the world, I need your help with your subscription, your share stuff like this to people who need it. This is a video that talks about marriage risk. Everyone fucking needs it. You know what I mean? Like, you should be sharing this. I understand though, you might get social repercussions, but you got that guy who's thinking about it. You got guys who are dumb and going into things like, with a complete lack of awareness. Hey, maybe they're probably not going to listen to you. We know that it happens, right? But maybe they might listen to a video. You know what I mean? Something to think about. So, all right, enough of that stuff. Let's talk about now problem with statistics. And of course, you guys got things to say it in the comment section. Any super chats or little stickers or goofy things that'll get my attention. If you have like a real question, I can get into it on stream, maybe solve a problem for you. Okay, so that'd be nice. So now what's the deal with the stats? The stats are bad. Okay, that's the problem. Is the stats are not good. Okay. And I've been trying to figure out, like, I've trusted some studies before a little bit too much. And then I wanted to reevaluate this information. And I'm finding even some trusted people misinterpreted metadata and meta studies on things I've said previously on YouTube. I'm scrapping pretty much all the data that I've presented before, most of that stuff years ago. because of lack of good practice in the research. That's the reality is the practice for research is not good. So when you look up something like marital satisfaction rates, for example, the data is not good. It's going to give you a number that is fictional, okay, because their sample sizes are flawed. The opinion polls and the way that they word the questions are flawed. You start getting into the study in it, and you see how flawed the study is, and it really isn't telling you anything. It really doesn't tell you any kind of good information. The biggest problem we run into with studies, especially when we are dealing with things of a sexual or relationship nature, is that people lie. They lie to themselves, right? So the guy who's in a terrible marriage that none of you would want to be in, who has to lie to himself every single day to wake up in the morning, go to work, take care of kids who don't respect him, deal with a woman who doesn't like him, deal with a sexless marriage, find little escapes for his life, like chores around the house or working outside or something to escape his misery. Like that dude will take a survey and say he's satisfied in his relationship because he is afraid to get off the plantation, right? He has created a prison for himself. And even in a self-reporting study, he's going to lie on that study. That's the reality of it. Women will lie too on the studies as well. It's both a male and female thing. So when it comes to this stuff, how do we trust the data? That's the biggest problem we have when people lie about their opinions. When it comes to sexual health and sexual satisfaction, people lie about that too. Even though I'm going to use some of that data, how do we mitigate for that? So I have to approach this data and this research like how an economist approaches doing a fundamental analysis for a company, which is by using, like, don't just listen to a narrative or listen to like what the CEO says of that company or whatever, right? Because that's only going to be one spin and a lot of that stuff isn't going to be true. And so just listening to like, well, this study said marriage is good, or only this amount of people are unhappy. Like it doesn't, when you start comparing that data and breaking that data down, it doesn't match with other data. There's no, it's not replicatable. Okay. It doesn't match like happiness or satisfaction stats. Doesn't match with divorce rates. How are people getting divorced at a rate higher than the satisfaction rates? Satisfied people aren't getting divorced, right? So it's just like it doesn't all match. When you start breaking it down, it can be crazy and frustrating to look at. So I'm gonna get you through that frustration today. I'm gonna show you how to really look at this stuff. And the best way that I know to date to be able to mitigate the problem of people's opinions on research polls. You know what I mean? And people's tendency to lie. So when people are writing down what their thoughts or feelings are, you're getting data on their thoughts and feelings about a situation. You're getting the story that they tell themselves. Well, when you're into human behavior like I am, you become a behavioral expert, you become an expert in persuasion, you realize, like anybody who works in law enforcement will tell you, interrogators will tell you, military intelligence, CIA, they will all tell you that people lie, right? People lie to themselves, and they're lying to themselves. That's a part of the human condition. People tell themselves stories. People are lying all over the place. And so how do you break through that? You know what I mean? That's the difficulty with this data. And then then to break through biases, researcher biases. How do you break through that stuff? And so that's something I'm going to attempt to do today. The other thing is too, okay, if a narrative or a study is unfavorable to the story or the social narrative in which that study is coming out of, it won't get sponsored. All right. So this is why, like a lot of things that maybe fit conservative values, and I'm not trying to be political, okay, because it's not a political channel. I'm just observing the facts. Academic environments tend to be more liberal and tend to be more, left ideology, okay, not conservative in their political ideology. The people that work there tend to be more on that liberal side of things, right? That's a fact. So what happens is you have to get, if you're, let's say, going for your PhD and you're going to do a research paper, or you're going to do a study, or you're going to conduct research or whatever, you have to get that research sponsored. And then you got to get that research, once it's complete, accepted to be peer reviewed and to make it to these journals. A lot of that research never gets sponsored, never makes it to journals because it doesn't fit the ideology of those who work in that environment. That's a reality. So we miss out on a lot of opportunities. And this is why certain areas of study are just not studied. They're not researched, and they're not researched with integrity because it doesn't fit the narrative of those people who work there. So you have to understand that, and that is a reality. Again, I may feature her thing or her work, but a woman, she's got a little YouTube channel. So I want to see, maybe I can get her on for an interview. But maybe it's career suicide for her to get on an interview with me. So maybe she won't do it. That's the thing I run into. Okay. But she did research on psychopathy in females and women in female professions. She talked about on her channel, I just happened to run into it, the struggle she had in getting her research sponsored because it featured women and female psychopaths. And she stated, if I did a study research on male psychopaths, everybody would sponsor that. That's not a problem. But because it was negative on potentially negative against females, or could be seen that way, that research, nobody wanted to publish it. Nobody wanted to sponsor it. She eventually did get it sponsored, but she really, really had to fight, and she had to put her career and reputation on the line. And I don't blame a lot of the people who are wondering about this stuff. A lot of times they're facing, like, do I put my academic reputation and ability to make a living and make money? I've gone, someone's gone for years and years of schooling, got a doctorate. They're going to throw it all away now, pursuing a research topic that isn't acceptable by the ideology of people in academia. Well, that's a really tall ask to ask them to do that. So even some well-minded researchers, they're just not going to breach certain things. They have to toe a line. That's the reality of it. And it's a shame because we miss out on a lot of potentially good information that would save lives and help people, right? Because ignoring reality isn't going to help you do better. That's what they do. And so that is why this research is so terrible and it's so bad, okay? So we have to approach it differently. We have to mitigate for the lies people tell, and we have to look at what has been able to be researched because it's a little less maybe politically charged, and see how that data measures with other numbers we have to come up with conclusions. So we have to approach it again like an economist. And so that's what I've done here for you guys. Now let me jump into some comments before I jump into a slideshow. Okay. Got a good afternoon. Time to get more black pilled. No, don't get black pilled. Just get reality pilled, man. That's it. Need you on Substack. I know that's like one more thing to do though. I appreciate the share though. Thank you. But I do get into my community though, because I post things there, things I'm like working on and ideas and stuff. Like a lot of times I hash them out there. You know what I mean? Get you guys' opinion. It's pretty cool. All right. So that's why I have the community on school, and it's free to be there. I have coaching groups, right, that pay money to do those things, and we do our coaching calls, but like to be in the community is not a cost. So go get there, man. I appreciate this. Thanks, man. You've been the most underrated, underviewed channel on YouTube for the longest time. I know, dude. I know. Some of that's my fault. Some of that's my fault because I'm just not, until recently, I haven't figured out how to be good with maneuvering around the digital marketing through these platforms. So some of that is a me problem, but there is a reality that I'm algorithmically suppressed. I don't care when people want to give me their excuses as to why that's not true. I know it's true. You know what I mean? And I'm not the only one, but the reality is if I fit a different demographic, I would have to work a lot less hard to get better results. That's the truth. Now, I'm not going to let that stop me. You know what I mean? I'm going to continue to maneuver. I'm not quitting. I don't quit. So I just see it as a challenge. We're going to get through it. And, someday there's going to be a lot wider reach, but it's not so much me trying to be famous or anything. I just want to get more people information that's going to help them. I want to give more people the tools and the skills to be happy, because as we'll see when we break these numbers down, it's looking pretty bad. You know what I mean? And one way to really secure a good quality of life is to have this area of your life sorted out. Man, you can pursue excellence, you can chase your dreams, build your wealth, do so much more things, help other people. Like, you can do so much more things, so much better when you're not wasting bandwidth on terrible relationship dating scenarios. Do you know what I mean? Or trying to cope with the psychological, emotional difficulty of being checked out of the dating market. Both of those things are big costs, where if you sort this stuff out, you exponentially increase your results everywhere else in your life. I mean, that's a reality. So that's why I do this, and hopefully we can get that going on more of a larger scale. Okay, cool. Let's go into the slideshow. Pressing buttons. Okay, I'm gonna hit that, share the screen. All right, let's see what my slideshow says. Okay, here's the end of it. All right. 86% of marriages fail. I'm going to we'll backwards engineer this. I'll show you how it ends up this way. Okay. Less than 14% of marriages succeed. Less than. And I'll get into why it's less than and not an exact number. If we use the female orgasm, this is like really bleak. If we use, does she come when she has sex with you, as a measure of sexual quality? Okay. Which I certainly do. I'm having a lot less fun if she's not getting her mind blown. You know what I mean? That's fun for me as a man, like to blow a chick mind, give her a bunch of mind-blowing orgasms, have her pass out, wake up, wondering, question her whole life. That's like my thing. That's what I like to do. That to me is successful sexual experience. You know what I mean? Having starfish sex or pretend sex with somebody who's, making some noises, but really isn't orgasming, and then she has to finish off later. That to me is not good sex. We're going to have another episode on sex more. We'll break down stats for that in the same way, because that's interesting to look at. So that's another video we'll do. But in this one, for using the female orgasm, like, so does she actually come when she's banging you, as a measure of sexual quality? Like, is she doing that regularly, right? The success rate's even worse than 14%. It comes out to like 4.6%. That's the exact number. The reason why I say 4 to 10% is because I'm being optimistic. I'm being optimistic because I'm going to assume that which is just an assumption. I don't have the data but it's a good assumption. You know what I mean? I'm hypothesizing that those who do stay in marriages and do report sexual satisfaction and self-reporting are less likely to be lying about their orgasm, less likely to be the ones who aren't orgasming during sex. That's what I'm assuming. So, if you just do raw data without considering, the orgasm piece for that target group, then it comes out to be, 4.6%, but it's likely higher than 4%. It's likely more like 8 to 10%, because reasonably speaking, people who are claim to be in healthy relationships, they're staying together, have a high satisfaction of sexual satisfaction in their self-reporting, are probably, orgasming, probably, right? And having that happen. So I'll break that down in another thing, but that's I have to assume a little bit. But if I'm looking at raw data, it's like 4%, right? But there's missing things. And that's another thing. This data I'm going to present is not perfect because they haven't done the research. So I'm challenging researchers to do better information. You know what I mean? They need to do better research. This is based on the research that I have. So it's a pretty good deduction. I think that when they do more research, it's going to verify rather than, negate what I'm saying. So I do believe that will be true, but we'll see, if they ever do it. The question is whether, if we're basing sexual satisfaction on orgasm rates and quality for the female, then is that 4% or 10%, you know, or somewhere where we're in between. That's where we're missing some data. But again, it won't matter for you if you do the right things. You can be part of the 4%. You can be part of the 10%, part of the 14%, whatever it is, if you do the right things, okay, which most people are not doing. So that's the thing. But we'll get to that. So here's the true picture, though, first for the stats. All right, so let's get going. So 40, we have to consider. So this is something that doesn't get considered, okay, which is like, all right, you have the marriage proponents saying, okay, like the divorce rates have gone down, guys. You know, marriage is looking better because divorce rates have gone down. Well, they're not considering adults who are not married. You have to consider that because they're making an assumption that adults are eventually going to get married. We cannot make that assumption anymore, and I'll show you why. Many people are checking out of the marriage market. Many people are refusing to get married, both men and women. So if you're refusing to get married, I consider that a failure in marriage. Wouldn't you agree? If you're not going to get married because it's a bad deal, that means marriage for you isn't a successful thing. Now, you may have a successful life and may have a successful relationship or successful short-term relationships. You know what I mean? You might have a great life as an unmarried person. That's not what we're measuring. We're measuring the success rate of marriage. You can't measure that if you don't consider people who have checked out of the marriage market altogether. Okay. So there's already from the get-go, when they analyze this stuff, they're kind of assuming that people who aren't married are eventually going to get married. And then they use the data like, okay, out of all the people that are married, let's look at who's divorced. And then they just go, well, the divorce rate, that's the failure rate. They're not considering people who've checked out of the marriage market to begin with. Many of those people can't get married. Well, if we're talking incel males and some incel females, there are some, they're just lower in percentage. Women and men who couldn't get married if they wanted to. Not right now, not with their physical and mental state. Okay. They have checked out so badly in the dating market, they can't get guys who cannot get girls to go on dates with them. They're not getting married. You know what I mean? Girls who can't get guys to want to have sex with them and then call them back the next day. Well, they're not getting married. You see what I mean? That is a failure in relationships, a failure in marriage as a whole as being successful. We have to consider that number because that number's been increasing over the past 30 years. Okay. So already everybody else out there besides us here in this conversation are approaching this the wrong way because they're not considering those who've checked out completely. Okay. And I'm not making a judgment again on those who checked out. Some make the conscious decision to check out and it's a great decision. Okay. So I'm not saying whether it's bad or good decision, but if we're talking about the success of marriage as a whole, checking out of marriage can be considered not a success. Wouldn't you agree? That means that part is part of the failure statistic. Okay. So 49% of adults are not getting married. 51% of adults are married. I'm looking at that slide's wrong, but whatever. So, well, whoops. Let's fix that. 51% of adults are married. All right. We just fixed it. Okay, good. All right. So we have to consider these numbers. Okay. As part of the whole. So we're going to deduce this now from there. So we're looking at that. All right. 49% of adults have checked out. Now let's look at another thing. So here we go. So if we're looking at 100 adults, because we're going to do percentages, right? Out of 100 adults, 49 have checked out, 51 have checked into marriage. Okay. So some have lost the marriage battle before they've started. At least as of today, maybe they could change their mind in 5 years and get, or find somebody to get married to in 5 years and they become part of the blue number. Right. But then guess what's happened since then? Somebody divorced also, right? So then they're part of the red. So these numbers, they basically exchange themselves. Do you know what I mean? People are divorcing every day, people are getting married every day, and there's a large cohort of people who've just checked out of the market. All right. So we have to consider that as part of our stats. So now we got this picture in our head. Okay. 51 out of out of 100 are married people trying to make it successful. We haven't gotten to divorce rates yet, haven't gotten to satisfaction rates yet. Okay. So we're already cut in half. We look at adults, okay, and what their relationship prospects are and what their marriage prospects are. When we look at adults, the numbers cut in half from the start. Okay. Why we consider this is what really, again, why we consider this. This is unmarried, not married. So the line going up is showing more people being not married. Okay. So this is the growth of unmarried adults from 1980 to 2020. And it keeps growing now that we're at 2025. But back in 1980, 33% of people were not married. Okay. So that, so now though, when we got to in the 90s, all right, 36% of people were not married. You know what I mean? So over 60% of people were married back in the 90s. You know what I mean? But now we get into the year 2000, 2005 to now, right? It might be a little higher now, even, but it's as of 2020, 49% are not married, have checked out of the marriage market. That's why this divorce rate declining by 5 points isn't spectacular. It's not a win for the apologists for marriage. Just because divorce rate might be 45% now instead of 50 or 51% or 55%, it was closer to 55% a couple of years. It's gone down to 45%, but look, marriage has plummeted. The rate of people even getting into sexual relationships has plummeted, right? So people aren't even having sex with each other as much as a whole, let alone actually getting married, having families, doing all that stuff. So you cannot consider a slight decline in the divorce rate as a win when your rate of people checking out of marriage altogether has increased exponentially. Okay, so that's the point that we need to consider. All right, and that's why we consider those who've checked out of the marriage market as part of the data. So now we continue. Okay, so what do you think? Do you think just being married but hating your spouse and not wanting to have sex with your spouse and not being attracted to that person and all that stuff, do you think that constitutes as a marriage success? I certainly don't think so. So normally when the marriage apologists look at the data, they look at divorce rates, you know what I mean? And even all sides, they look at divorce rates. But divorce rates doesn't express whether people are happy. There's a whole percentage of people who are not happy in their relationships. Okay. And the problem here, stop sharing for a second. The problem here is that these people that do these surveys, this is where you run into the lying. This is where you run into the not telling the truth on the survey. Okay. The dorky married guy who secretly hates his life and can't face anything, who says, I'm happy with my wife, right? The woman who hates her life and fantasizes about her personal trainer every day, who writes, I'm satisfied with my marriage because I like my kids and I like my PTA meetings and my job. You know what I mean? Like they will use all of these creative arguments and mental, gymnastics in order to justify their own misery. That's a fact. So how do we mitigate, right, for people doing self-reporting surveys and lying on the surveys? And I think it's very ignorant to think that people are being honest on these surveys. We know they're not. Just a matter of to what degree are they being dishonest, right? And to how many people, that's the part that's a bit of a mystery. But we can solve some of that mystery when we look at the sex rates and the sexual satisfaction. So When we look at sexual satisfaction, okay, your marriage is not a glorified friendship. If you're sexually committed to that person, it's a sexual relationship. So, what distinguishes a marriage or a LTR from a friendship is sex, right? Wouldn't you agree? Okay. Sex is what is the line between friends, living together, whatever, business partners, and romantic relationship, healthy marriage, healthy long-term relationship. Sex is the dividing line. So people might, especially people being women, because it's more socially acceptable in some ways, at least, they're just less likely to lie about their sexual satisfaction and where they're at there in a survey than their happiness rates. So, in other words, like a woman might be sexually dissatisfied, which means she's not satisfied or happy with her husband, but she will write that she's happy in her marriage, let's say moderately happy or something in a survey, because she likes her kids, she likes her lifestyle, she likes her house, maybe a Christian and doesn't believe in divorce. All of these things weigh into when she puts that opinion down. But the reality is that she's lying to herself. She's not actually happy, because you can't be happy in a romantic relationship without the romance. Right? I mean, that should be common sense, but it's fucking not for some reason, because people lie to themselves. All right. People people bullshit themselves all across the board when it comes to this stuff. And it's mind numbing to be in this industry and just have that happen every day. All right. So the amount of bullshit that people will tell themselves is insane. People actually will make this argument. I know there's people who will make the argument, whether they do it directly to me. It's funny if they do it to me, because it's just going to get destroyed in the argument, but usually they'll do it on other platforms, other places. They'll make the argument that sex is not the reason for the marriage. And sex is not the only thing that's important. Right. And like all of this cap, right? All of this coping stuff that they're going to do to ignore the facts. And the facts are that sex is what separates a romantic relationship from a non-romantic one. And if the sex is not good, then the romantic relationship is not good. Okay? Like, it's pretty fucking simple, but people lie to themselves about this. They want to do gymnastics in their head because they don't want the girl doesn't want to, her husband to leave her, you know what I mean? When her lifestyle depends on his income and his labor. So she's not happy sexually. So she's going to use a lot of mental gymnastics to say, oh, I love him. I'll tell you, in a past life, this is a little bit savage now, a little bit less academic, but in a past life, when I used to run through girls and didn't care, okay, don't recommend it, but it was something I had a period of my life. A lot of those girls, embarrassed to say, were in relationships, married, some of them, whatever. They would cheat with me and they would not fucking care. Okay. That's the reality. Hundreds of women out there, all right, will cheat. Maybe let's not dime my numbers out, but dozens of women out there, okay, will cheat and not care. And will say, how many times I've been sitting next to somebody after blowing them away in the bedroom, whatever. Okay. And I know that because they keep coming back. They sit there and they go, I love my husband though. He's really a good guy. Like, they will sit there with the person that they're screwing another person with, you know what I mean? The cheating partner, they will sit there and justify, like, but he's really a good person. We're just not, compatible. We're not sexually compatible, or we just kind of fell off, or this and that and the other. They do it all the time. You know what I mean? So, I mean, people lie to themselves. That woman, those women that, and I'm not saying I should have done this. This is not good. Okay. It's an admission of guilt, not necessarily a brag. It's not a brag, but these women that cheated with me, okay, they would do a survey and say, happy in my relationship, happy in my marriage, satisfied, but they might do on a sexual survey unsatisfied in their relationship. They might say that they're not satisfied sexually in their relationship, but overall they're happy. They don't want to get divorced. You see what I'm saying? So we got to look at the sex. People don't like to look at the sex because guys are out there doing creative data to try to justify the fact that they're bad at sex. That's going to be the another statistical video when I break down the sex statistics, how most of you guys are fucking bad at it. I'm sorry, but it's true. Okay. And women too. You know what I mean? But women have more of I would consider women having a little bit more of a passive role in the sexual experience. So a lot of that is up to us guys, and you guys are not doing it well. You're just not. Nobody taught you, and you have an ego, and so you're not willing to learn. That's the reality, is that most guys out there are full of shit, and they're not willing to do better. This is why they can't fucking fight. This is why they get drunk on the weekends, and this is why they can't fuck a girl very well, and she becomes unsatisfied in her relationships. Sorry, it's just sorry to bring you the bad news. This is why I'm not very popular, but whatever the fuck, it is the truth. Okay. So we have to look at the sex. We have to look at the sex. You're not in a marriage, you're not in an LTR, so you can be in a friendship, right? And if that turns into that, that's not a successful relationship. Now, we can all agree with that. Yes. I know people who listen to me are like, yeah, dude, of course, move on, right? But new people who log into this are going to be like, no, I don't know. You know what I mean? No, you fucking know. Okay. You know, and you know that you cannot consider your relationship successful if you're not having, I would say, a peak sexual experiences with your relationship partner. Why do I say peak? It has to be peak. Why? Because you've turned or traded in your sexual self for that relationship, because you've committed. If you're monogamous, you've traded your sexual options and opportunities to build this relationship, which is by nature a sexual relationship. So if it is not peak for her, peak for you as a man, I'm going to argue it's not really a successful relationship, or at least not as successful as it should be. Okay. So now that we've gotten the air cleared, what cuts through the bullshit of people lying on surveys is when we can look at sexual satisfaction rates. Now, there's still bullshitting, though, that happens on a self-reporting survey about sexual satisfaction. There is still the potentiality for bullshit, but I think it's a little bit less. When I get into another video where we break down the sex stats and we realize, okay, well, what's the physiological data with orgasms? You see where people are lying, a lot of those people being women, okay, lying about their ability, their sexual satisfaction, where they're at, okay. But at the very least, though, when they're filling out that survey, at least their perceptions are that the sex is good. So let's take that, for example. Let's say a woman isn't really orgasming with her husband very often or ever, okay? But maybe that's the sex she's used to, and that's what she's lived with up to this point. So to her, it feels satisfying enough. So that means that maybe she could be in a happy relationship, even though the sex could be improved. She actually doesn't know any better. You know what I mean? So that happens a lot too. And so that's why we're going to use and consider it having some integrity, the self-reporting data, when it comes to sexual satisfaction. Okay. So, and thank you. Brutal sometimes, but the truth hurts. Time to level up. That's what this is about. Time to just start doing better and stop making fucking excuses, right? Right. Okay. Now let's get into the rest. Okay. So back to the stuff and the presentation. So when we look at the stats, sexually satisfied in a marriage, 36% self-reported, which means sexually unsatisfied is 64%. Okay. So long-term, and this is just long-term relationships in general. All right. As you get closer to a marital commitment and as you get further down the line in the length of being together, these numbers get worse. All right. So sexual satisfaction goes down for most people in committed relationships over time. I'm not saying this to say or make an argument that long-term relationships don't work because of this. What I'm saying this is to alert you to a problem that you need to solve so you can make your long-term relationship work. I'll tell you what, sexual satisfaction doesn't go down in my relationships, and it's been that way for a very long time. Okay, there was a time in my life where it had, and then I worked on that, fixed it. It's been well over a decade or longer since that's been a thing. Okay, so my long-term relationships don't lose sexual satisfaction over time. If anything, it actually gets better over time. That's what my partners, the women I've been with would report, is that it gets better over time, not worse. Okay, for anyone who's been in a long-term situation with me. And I'm not just saying that as a brag. I'm not the only one out there. There's a lot of people out there where that's the case, but statistically, though, it isn't the case. So now you know where there's a point or a thing you need to pay attention to have a successful long-term relationship. You have to pay attention to the sexual quality of your relationship. And you have to continue to revive that and push that and explore that. And the longer you're together, the longer you have to continue doing that. That's just part of the process. That never ends. If you get complacent in your sex life and you're in a long-term relationship or marriage, she as well as possibly you will eventually move into the 64% category of people who are sexually unsatisfied. All right, so that's a problem. Okay, so if we're looking at satisfaction in the relationship, we got to consider these numbers. And so in considering these numbers now, let's break it down further. All right, 51 adults that get married, right? Because remember, 49 checked out of the market. Sexually satisfied in their relationships is only 19 out of the 51. 32 are not sexually satisfied or happy. So 32 of the 51, 32% of the total number, okay, is the 32 of that 51. They're not having a successful relationship. By definition, if you're not sexually satisfied in your long-term relationship, it's not successful. You could change that, of course, right? But at the moment, at that time, when you're not sexually satisfied or she's not sexually satisfied, it is a failed relationship until you change it by, getting in a new one, all right, scrapping it, or doing, changing the sexual dynamic in your relationship so that the satisfaction is there. But if it's sexually dissatisfying relationship for either person, it's not successful. I think we can all agree on that, which then means only 19 out of the 100% are really being successful in marriage. But we're not even done because we haven't considered divorce yet, have we? So we haven't even brought in divorce yet. We're just bringing in the satisfaction data. Okay. So we're already down to 19 and we haven't even brought in the divorce rate yet. Isn't that crazy? All right. So we keep going. I got to make this point a little bit more solid for you guys because there is a ton of data out there on sexual satisfaction in marriage, as sexual satisfaction is the predictor of a strong marriage. You need one thing. If you got to boil it down to one thing that's going to predict whether your marriage is going to be good, successful or not, it's the sex. 100% the sex and the sexual quality. That's it. Okay. I mean, there's other factors that matter. I'm not saying it's the only thing, because there's those people who come in, it's not all about sex. It's not the only thing. Listen, the STI, sexual transmitted infections and diseases rates are extremely high where? In elderly communities, right? In elderly communities, the STI rates are high. Look it up. Okay. Why? Why are they high? Because people fuck each other. That's why. And that means so do old people. So this myth that 80-year-old people aren't fucking is a myth. It's not true. We have STI rates to prove that. Some 80-year-old people aren't, but there's a lot that are. And in fact, when they lose their marital partners and they're single, they tend to get pretty damn loose in their old age, a lot of them. Okay. So that's a fact. So we can't assume, oh, well, sexual satisfaction It doesn't matter, I guess, if you're like 75 years old. Guess again, it does. People are still fucking then. They may be fucking less, maybe for less time. They might need even a medical intervention or something, right? To make it happen, but they're doing it and they want to do it because it's a primal drive for us, right? It's a primal drive for human beings to have sex at any age. So don't be an ageist and assume that, well, you settle in with your partner. Don't listen to the bullshit narrative that's out there. You settle in with your partner and then the sex just doesn't matter as much. And it becomes about the kids and this and that and the other, and you grow old together. Wrong. Sexual satisfaction is your largest predictor of divorce or success. That's the reality. Multiple studies find a moderate to strong correlation between sexual dissatisfaction and marital dissatisfaction in divorce intentions. The less sexually satisfied a person is, the more likely they're going to be unhappy or end the relationship. Facts, dude. Facts. You cannot ignore these facts. Example, one meta-analysis found that sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction correlated at R equals 0.58. Okay. And then I put Journal of Sex Research 2006. All right. We'll keep going. There's a bunch of data on this. Okay. It's not just one thing. All right. So this is pretty solidly proven. Longitudinal studies show sexual dissatisfaction can predict later divorce, even after controlling for other factors like communication and conflict. All right. So sexual dissatisfaction can predict divorce, even when you control all of the other stressors in the relationship. You understand that? It makes sense, doesn't it? You're not in a friendship that you're raising a family with. You're in a marriage. You're in a relationship, a romantic relationship. Okay. In the National Marriage Project data, University of Virginia, couples reporting low sexual satisfaction were 2 to 3 more times likely to divorce within the following 5 years. Okay. A Journal of Marriage and Family study found that declining sexual satisfaction over time strongly predicted declines in relationship happiness, which is the most direct pathway to divorce. This is not like, you don't need a researcher to tell you this, but because people are sort of lying to themselves, right? Then you guess you do. You know what I mean? You shouldn't need a researcher to tell you that if the sex isn't good in the relationship, that the relationship is on thin ice and probably going to end. Like, you shouldn't need somebody to research that to tell you that. But people love to lie and ego protect and use mental gymnastics to bullshit themselves. So we have to. But that's common sense, though. I feel like I'm just saying what should be common sense, but it's not common sense. When have you heard in the social narrative that if the sex is bad in a marriage is going to end? Where have you heard that? Are the churches talking about that? All of the marriage apologists, is the Daily Wire talking about that? For example, they're marriage apologists. And I like them. I actually like them. Is this a Jordan Peterson talk somewhere? I like Jordan Peterson. Where's the talk about how sex needs to be, solid for a relationship to be successful? We got the data, we got the research. It's not part of the social narrative because people like to bullshit themselves. They don't want to talk about the sex because that makes them feel, icky and weird and sad because they're not good at it. The male ego is very fragile, and boys out there get sad when their peepees aren't doing what they want. And so, they've been addicted to porn and jerking themselves and dicking around and looking at the waitress instead of focusing on their wives or their girlfriends. And then the sex is bad and then they're sad about it. That's why. Right. And then women are full of shit and they don't want to have to tell a guy what he needs to do. And women like to use sex to have power over men, unfortunately, especially very unhappy women. So they're not pushing out this story either. Right. It's just not being told. Okay. But we need to tell that story a little bit more often, don't we? Okay, cool. So So now we've established that, okay, sex is that predictor. That's how we know if they're being happy or not. So when we look at that data, here's a bunch of more data. Okay, there's some cited sources. You can take a screenshot, go look it up for yourself if you want to. All right. But when we look at then this number, right, we're looking at when we look at this, right, we're looking at this is how we know. Are they happy or not? Only, without even considering divorce yet, only 19 so far are happy in a marriage, or we could say LTR after, out of 100, right? So 19%. We're down to 19%, haven't even gotten a divorce. Okay, let's get there now. Okay. Divorce rates, 45%. They've come down over the years. So I need to point that out. Let's not, a lot of the people who are against marriage don't point this fact out. The divorce rates have gone down. But as I've said before, that's not really a win because the rates of people checking out of marriage has exponentially gone up. So taking a 5% or even a 6, 7, 8% cut in a rate of divorce isn't that impressive when the rates of people checking out of marriage has grown exponentially higher, right? But we'll look at that in a real sense. Divorce rate 45%. We can see this. I'll even illustrate this with a graph over time. Okay, this said 46% according to another thing, but maybe it's 46, maybe it's 45, right? Okay, but it was 50% in the 90s. All right, so it's gone down a little bit over 25 years. Okay, so there we go, a slight decline. Okay, so we're looking at a 45% divorce rate. Now let's consider that into our successful marriage statistics. So of all marriages, 45% will divorce. All right. Now we have to make an assumption here because sexual satisfaction is correlated with success rates in marriage, but they don't have enough research on it to build that correlation and to build causality. There needs to be more research done. So we just kind of have to make some assumptions here. Basically a hypothesis, but I think it's a reasonable assumption because there are marriages where there is sexual satisfaction, but they divorce anyway. That does happen where two people are sexually happy with each other, but due to other extenuating circumstances, they end up getting divorced. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens some of the time. So we have to consider that. So we're going to assume that 80% of that 19%, right? The 19 people left out of the 100, 80% of those divorced rather. So not the 19, but the other one, right? The 81%. We'll assume that the ones that are divorced, right? The ones that are not, that we'll assume that 80% of those come from sexually dissatisfied people, not satisfied. All right. So it's not going to be just 45% cut from 19. That wouldn't be a fair way of doing it because we know that sexually satisfied couples tend to stay together. All right. And we can estimate based on some data we have, but again, it's not complete, that about an 8 out of 10 marriages where the sexual satisfaction is reported as high would stay together. Okay. So if 8 out of 10 people married would stay together, and report sexual high satisfaction, that means 2 out of 10 are sexually satisfied, but yet they divorce anyway. Okay. So that's where we're going to consider the divorce statistics of 45% statistics. We got to match that data with sexual satisfaction and dissatisfaction rates. So that turns into this math problem. Hopefully you're following me. Okay. That 20%, all right, times the 45%, okay, divorce rate times the 51 that got married, all right, leads to a 4.59. We can estimate that to a 5. All right. So out of 100 people, 5 who are married and sexually satisfied will divorce, somewhere between 4 and 5. Okay. It's pretty reasonable. You consider 100 people, okay, bunch of people check out of marriage, 51 people get married. Out of the 51, or the 100, depending on how you're looking at it, 5 were sexually happy, but just had to divorce anyway. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Washes out with the statistics. We need more research to figure out, is it exactly 5? Is it 4? Is it 3? Is it 8? You know what I mean? But it's not going to be much different. It's going to be around here. I think that with more research, it's going to verify these numbers rather than deny or disprove these numbers. So when we look at that data and we consider the divorce rate match with sexual dissatisfaction and satisfaction rates, we get an additional 5 people getting divorced. Okay. So that leads us to this number. So out of 19 sexually satisfied people who got married, 5 of those are divorcing, which leaves us with what number? 14 out of 100 will succeed in marriage. Okay. So right now, the rate, this is the best we got. Everybody else out there is full of shit and lying. I challenge you to find better information. Okay. I'm willing to update this and change this as better information comes out. All right. But for right now, what we have is your success, the general populace, the success statistics 14 out of 100 people, or 14%, will succeed in marriage. 86% then will fail in marriage. Okay. Fail either by divorcing or fail because they're not satisfied in their relationship. That is the numbers. Okay. So this checks out pretty well. All right. So back to this final slide, 86% of marriages fail. Less than 14% of marriages succeed. And we'll talk about sex in a different YouTube, a different live stream. But if we consider the female orgasm and we as part of the data, whether or not she comes during sex or not, and as that measure of quality, there's women out there who are reporting sexual satisfaction who aren't coming during sex, right? During this penetration. They're having to do it through other ways later on or whatever. And I'll get into that. So that's something to consider. Okay. That only 18% of women right now are actually orgasming during sex, unless they're using a toy or using something else. You're right, during like penetration. But during just the act of sex by itself, only 18% of women right now are actually orgasming. That's pretty good data on that. So if we consider that, it's not 14%, it's less than 14%. That's why I have less than 14%. How much less? Well, we're not sure because we got to do a little bit more research. I don't think it's as low as 4%, but it could be probably somewhere between 4 and 10%, because it just stands to reason that the women who are staying together in a marriage and not divorcing are probably having better sex and report better sex. It stands to reason that a higher percentage of those than the average of 18% are orgasming. You know what I mean? It stands to reason that they're doing better with their orgasms. I just don't know where and how much better, because there isn't enough data to tell us. But we know it's probably somewhere between 4 and 10%. All right. All right. So we know it's less than 14%. We know it's probably closer to around between 4 and 10% when we consider, not just opinion polls and sexual satisfaction, but actual physiological responses. You know what I mean? So that's what we got. That's what's happening out there. That's the truth. Okay. That's what. That's funny. People spurging out on Twitter. I don't even know who Chucky is. Yeah. Who's doing all these political polls, right? I mean, they're out there, but I get what you mean. Okay. Got to move to the village. Hey, don't talk about my mom like that. My mom, I swear to God, my mom does live in the villages too. She does though. But my mom is happily married, so everybody shut the fuck up about that. No, I don't. It's the villages are huge, and not everybody is swinging over there. Just to FYI, I've been there. It's pretty cool. It's actually beautiful for retirees. My mom's living the good life over there. Yeah. So that is what we got. If you guys have questions, fire them off now. But that is what we got, guys. That's the real numbers. Do you know what I'm saying? Those are the real numbers. Now, here's the important point I'm going to make at the end here. That's the society's numbers. It's not your numbers, though. It's not your personal numbers. Your personal okay, rate of success or probability of success isn't necessarily 4% or 10% or 14%. Okay. Because you have control over your situation. Here's what's nice. And I made this point in another video. I don't know if it came out yet or not because I did a bunch of pre recording, but I make this point in another video, maybe coming out this week. I don't know. But the reality is, your relationship success is one thing you have 100% control over. And I'm saying, unless you're in a hospital with an iron lung or some crazy shit, right? Going on, which none of you listening to me are like, right? None of you are. I've had people with severe disabilities that I've coached into having healthy relationships. People you would think would never succeed. Okay. So it's out there. All right. People are doing it and people are getting married successfully too. And we got to point that out. All right. It's not all doom and gloom. Just like, and I go back to the analogy, it's just like starting a business. Something like what, 95, 96, 98% of all businesses fail, on the first try, those sorts of things, right? Those bad stats. Well, that doesn't mean you're going to fail if you start a business because you have control over your situation. You have the ability to make decisions both in the dating process and making decisions for vetting a woman who's capable and a good match for you for a long-term relationship, as well as decisions you make in the long-term relationship in order for it to be successful. And marriage, by the way, isn't some magic like voodoo spell that changes the dynamic between a couple. What I mean by that is you're not going to get married and say magic words or something and say the magic words for marriage and then have better success because of that. But it's not going to be worse either. Do you know what I mean? It's not like your LTR would be better if you just never got married. I mean, maybe your risk is better, right? Your risk of being abused by the state and some of those things is better by not getting married as a man. But that doesn't mean your long-term relationship potential is better because you didn't say the magic words. Do you see what I mean? Marriage or not marriage, that doesn't necessarily change anything. So what I mean by that is like, I would argue that this 14%, okay, of potential good relationships out there are married and not married LTRs. So if you want an LTR that's successful, don't think, well, I'm just going to avoid marriage and then that'll be fine because I won't be a part of those statistics. It's a dumb way to look at it because you're still with somebody long term, building a life where the sex can dry up and go down, where interest can wane, she can lose attraction, and shit can go south, and now you're in an unhappy relationship. That still can happen. You think that by not getting married, that's the solution to that problem? It doesn't solve anything. Now, I'm not suggesting you do get married either. I'm leaving that one up to you. My only warning about marriage is that you do something to protect yourself. If you do, talk to an attorney, do the prenup, do all that stuff, right? Because the other side of it is if you believe it's your God-given calling to marry somebody, like seriously, and I'm not saying that sarcastically, that's your religious beliefs. First of all, God bless you. I support you, okay, in that belief. I don't think it's a bad belief to have. And if you believe in that, then you got one fucking life and one chance to get it right. And so you're going to do what I suggest is you go for it. Okay. You do it. You just do it the right way. Don't do it like an idiot. You know what I mean? It's like if you're going to start a business, don't be an idiot when you start a business. Do it the right way. Do the research, know the risks, and mitigate the risks by learning the skills you need to learn to make it successful. That's what it is. Okay. You know, based on this video, you have to pay attention to sex, right? Well, there's skills that go into that to making that successful. And those skills, by the way, aren't just in the bedroom. Okay. They're also outside of the bedroom, which correlates to what happens in the bedroom, right? There's relationship skills you need to have. There's psychological development you need to have. There's self-awareness you need to have. And you can be part of the top 1% of relationships that your probability of divorce could be zero, next to zero, close to zero. You know what I mean? If you do the right things. This is one area of your life where you have 100% control. And I'm going to say that again because a lot of guys don't get it. Look, let's say you have a goal of becoming a professional athlete, like you wanted to be a pro baseball player. Well, guess what? There's a lot of people who try to be professional baseball players who don't make it. And those reasons are not all in their control. They get injury. They're just not skilled or talented enough despite their best efforts. They just maybe don't have some of the opportunities. Maybe something happens in their life and they miss a time window or whatever, and they just don't make it. That's what life is. Sometimes in life, you don't get what you want and you just don't make it for certain goals and certain things. In which case, what are you going to do? Cry? No, you're going to reevaluate your identity and you're going to find your value and you're going to pursue something different. That's what you'll do for other things in life. But romantic relationships, that's different. You have 100% control here because you have control of who you choose. You have control as to whether you stay or not. If a relationship can't be successful, why are you sticking around? Why aren't you leaving and getting into something more successful, right? You have behaviors you can do in a relationship to increase the probability of success or increase the probability of failure. So you have actually 100% control here. What you lack is skill. This is a skill-based thing. Okay. And that's why I'm here to help you guys. Right. So you got to understand that piece. All right. Hopefully this was useful. You know what to do and you know where to find me. All right. Take care, guys.